Hello, students. This is going to be our start of our simplex method. So I skipped 6.1. We're just going to start with 6.2. 6.1 it made it even more confusing for the simplex method. So we're just going to skip that. So what is this? So there's this guy, his name is George Danzing, if I say it right. And he is a mathematician that he was like born in the early 19s, and he like invented this method to really solve realistic problems with more constraints. So this has been a newer math than a lot of the things that we teach you. And it was really created more for the business side. Is it fun? No. Is it hard? Yes. Um, the math behind it is all add, multiply, subtract. So it doesn't bring any algebra in, but it is the remembering what to do when that gets a little bit hard. So then there's not a calculator that does the simplex method well. So that's the other issue too. So let's look at what it is. So this system that we're going to start with, that I'm going to do a big example through, is one that could be solved with that geometric method, but we're going to use the simplex method because it has a pretty answer and it's a pretty problem, right? We'll do harder simplex problems as we move along in this chapter. So the initial system here is, this is a tent problem that has been brought up in the textbook. So I was like, previously discussed, and I was like, I don't think we've actually done this one. So here is this tent problem. I don't remember the wording for it. And it's got a profit that equals $50 times probably tent one, and $80 you make off of tent two. And it has these constraints right here. So the constraints are x1 plus 2x2 has to be lower than or less than 32. And then the other one is 3x plus 4x2 has to be less than or 84. And everything has to be positive, is kind of what this end is saying. So notice we're always subject to either profit or cost. So we're going to maximize profit. P is profit. Okay. That's our idea for today, is maximizing profit. Next time we will minimize cost. They're different, right? So today we're going to maximize our profit. Profit we can't have negative amounts of items purchased. And we could have negative profit, but that's not good, right? So the way that we start this is we have something called slack variables. So we're going to rewrite this system and then make it a matrix and solve it that way. So they call this the initial system. And what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite this profit function right here. And what we're going to do is we want everything to be on the left side, like the x1 and x2s are below. So let me write that down real quick and show you what I mean. So we're here, right? I need the 50x1 and the 80x2 to be on the left, and I need them to line up with these x1s and x2s. So I'm going to minus the 50x1 over. So it's a negative 50x1. Then I'm going to minus the 80x over to the other side. X2, I think I called it x1, but in x2, 80x2. So I minus them to the other side. Then they can still be added to the p, and now there's nothing left on this side. So you have to start with rewriting that maximum, minimize, whatever. We call it our objective function, like our goal is to maximize P. So we have to rewrite that. And then we like to write this at the bottom of our initial system. So this is going to be the initial system. It's going to be with our slack variables. Oops, hold on just real quick. What would a slack variable be? A slack variable is, I have to have these in the form equal, and I've already rewritten the objective, but look at the top of the screen there. Those are less than and less than, right? think about how less than is. If we have a slack variable, because you can be anything less than 32, that slack variable can pick up like in between where you're equal. So let me write it out and maybe my words will stop being kind of jumbled and make a little bit more sense. So we're going to write out this top one, and we're going to write it out as x1 plus 2x2. But instead of less than or equal to, we're going to make it equal to 32. And we're going to introduce, move it over to the left a little ways. We're going to introduce our first slack one variable. I got to label it 1 because we're going to need a second one. Okay. Basically, this equation equals the other one because S1 will bring up any of the part that is less than 32. That will be involved in the slack. So this is the same equation, inequality written as an equation. Now let's write the second one, which went 3x1 plus 4x2. Again, this time I want to write an S2 equals 84, and there is a method to my madness on these spaces, okay? Because of the way we set up our matrix, we want the S1 to have its own row, own column, S2 to have its own column. And then the last one that we always write in the bottom will be our objective function. And I want to write the 50x1, negative 50x1 under the x1s, okay? And then the negative 80x2s under the x2s. And then again, leave a space. I have the p equals 0. So that's your initial system with your variables in everywhere, with your slack variables, everything. Okay, so couple things. That's just our initial system. And here it is written out again. They do have this part here. They have that has to be greater than 0, 0, 0. All of our variables have to be positive, or it has no solution. So, because we could say like, hey, I'm going to build houses that are pre-built, right? And I'm going to have this kind and this kind. And I can have this whole idea with all these constraints on the wood price, the hours, the constraints on all these things. And then you can't have a feasible answer. You have no profit. That is possible. So negative answers aren't good. Okay, so I brought up, I like to say the word so lately. I stopped saying so now I say so. So the system has basic variables and non-basic variables. This is just technicality part, but I'm going to bring it up to you. A basic variable would be our S, our S2, and our P when we first start. And our X1 and X2s are what we call non-basic. Okay, so non-basic really don't have a value. Right now, this slack does have a value of 32. This slack has a value of 84. It's like we haven't used that slack and our profit's still at 0. So that becomes like some of your homework problems ask you about that. So we gotta make sure we point it out. So let's go ahead and write the augmented matrix for this. And the matrix is gonna go 1, and this is our X1 row, column. It's a column. So X1 is the first column. X2 is that second column, which has a 2 on our first one. S1 has a 1. Then we have S2 and P, and those we would write as zeros because they don't have values. We always label the top because you could do P, S1, S2. It could mix up a little. You could have, if you had 3 equations, which you will have, you'll have 3 S2s. So you could have more than one. And then you might have an X3. If you have an S2, you probably have an X3. There's 3 equations, 3 unknowns. Okay, then the next one would go 3, 4, 0, 1, because there's one S2 there. No profit, 84. Last one goes negative 50, negative 80, 0, 0, 1, 0. Okay, and the way they like this to be kind of written is with a solid line here and a dotted line here. Okay, and our objective function is on the bottom. So as we solve this matrix, we're actually going to become more and more profit, and our variables that right now have meaning will become meaningless, and the other variables will become meaningful. So for what I'm meaning by that is this line right here has only ones and zeros. So we go across from the one, ignoring everything else, and we say right now that slack variables worth 32. Okay. Slack 2 is worth 84. And the profit is worth 0. When we have a column that has lots of stuff, it doesn't have a meaning. Okay, it is non-basic, therefore the value is 0. So what we want is to start making tens and certain amounts of x1 and x2, and that slack to go away and have profit. And that's what's going to happen as we go along. Okay, lots of wordy stuff. Oh, it came up question marks on here. That's funny. It was just dots here. That was just helping with entering, non-entering, non-basic, basic functions. This comes from that learning worksheet I normally do. I liked this kind of cleaned up version, so I put that in here. This is what we're going to start to learn now, is called the pivot. Basically, we have to figure out how to solve this thing because it's not exactly like we've been doing. So this pivot element, where's that equation? Oh, here it is. So I'm going to explain what's in that box, but I have to show it from down here on this part here. Okay. So what we're going to have is we're going to have negative indicators in the bottom, and we're going to find the most negative on the bottom. So our most negative is negative 80, and then that column is going to be our pivot column. Okay, then we have to decide which is our pivot variable. And we decide that by looking at this 2 and this 4 in relationship to the 32 and the 84. So you'll notice over here, we're going to divide them 32 by 2, 84 by 4. And the smallest one is now going to be our pivot. So I'm going to circle that one, and this is going to be our pivot variable. Okay, that's important. Always circle your pivot variable. Again, most negative on the bottom and the smallest ratio with the relationship to the last row and the column for the pivot column. Okay, so you will have to do this idea until there's no more negative indicators in the bottom. One thing to note is if you would had a negative in here, like -4, you cannot use that as a pivot variable. So you just ignore it. So 4 would have been negative. We wouldn't have even had to divide. We would have just said 2's our pivot. So zeros and negatives you cannot use on a pivot variable. You get to kind of just ignore them. If I would have had both negatives, there's no solution to this problem. Okay? Or both zeros. That's our pivot variable. So that's important process, most negative, smallest. Once I have that, I'm going to do it by hand, but I do have all this process written out with diagrams for my online students, just because it's all written out pretty for you, or as pretty as I could get it. But I'm going to do this pivot by hand. What I want to start with always is to make that pivot a 1. Okay, so I always want to make your pivot variable a 1. That's kind of our first thing to do. Pivot variable a 1. So I'm going to take row 1 and I'm going to divide it by 2 because that'd make that 1 in that spot. So they label all their X's and stuff. I do not label them the whole time. Like it becomes a lot, but you can label the X1, X2, S1, S2, P on the top, the first one and maybe the last one as you work through. So this becomes a 1/2, which is, you can write the decimal, that's fine. The second one becomes the 1 that we wanted. I'm still going to circle it. And this becomes a 1/2. The 0 divided by anything is 0. 0 divided by anything is 0. Half of 32 is 16. Okay, so that's our first step on that one. Okay, now I'm going to write out the other ones. So that's going to be 3, 4, 0, 1, 0, 84, -50, -80, 0, 0, 1, 0. Keep this line dotted here. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to make the 4 and the -80 zeros. So make zeros. I didn't spell zeros with the R. And that's going to be this one and this one. So however you want to label that for yourself, you have to make those zeros. So you have to show on your work what you're doing. If I can't follow what you're doing and you just magically have the answer, I'm going to think you found some kind of a calculator online. There are some that will do basic ones like this. Most of them's work is terrible. Most of them are hard to use. I will look again if there is a good one. And we would want to use a calculator if we could find one for word problems and harder and real life. But you're going to have to do these by hand. So the exam and the quizzes are going to be like one problem that you have to do by hand and show me your work. With that said, let's go ahead and make those zeros. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take -4 times row 1. That's going to make the 1 a -4, and that row 2, if I add, it'd make the 0. So then I'm going to add that to row 2, and I'm going to replace it on row 2. For the sake of not killing 50,000 trees, I'm going to take care of the 80 at the same time. I would do +80 times row 1 plus row 3, and then I'm going to replace that one on row 3. So I'm going to do both of these operations, and the only row that stays the same is row 1. So I'm going to write that out down here. So then we're just going to do this. So row 1 is going to stay 1/2, 1, 1/2, 0, 0, 16. The next one is going to become a 1 because -4 times row 1. So -4 is -2, and the 3 make a +1. Yeah, you can use your calculator for this little part, no problem. -4 times this plus that is a 0. And then the 1/2, it's going to be -4 times 1/2, which is -2 plus 0 is -2. And then this one stays a 1 because 0 times anything plus 1, 0 times anything plus 0. And then this one becomes a 20. Okay, check that out. We're done. Now the bottom row is an 80 times row 1 plus the bottom row. So 80 times 1/2 is 40. So that becomes a -10 here when you add. And then this becomes the 0 because that's how we set it up. And then -80 times 1/2 plus 0 is 40. Excuse me. Half of 80 is 40. And then 0 and 0 still make a 0. 80 times 0 plus 1 is still a 1. 80 times 16 is big. I paused. 80 times 16. 1,280. Okay. So we have done one pivot. Right now, if I cared to write where my answer is right now, I have now done away with, let's label this so we remember what this was. This is X1, X2, S1, S2, and profit. So we have now, this has no value. So no more, slack 1 has no more numbers involved in it. Now we have a value for X2, and that is 16. All right. And what's our profit right now? 1,280. Am I done? No, but that is the solution to the current problem. So rows with lots of numbers are still 0, no meaning. This one would be 16. We still have slack of 20 here. Okay. So that could be 20 hours we can still use, or it could be 20 items. Kind of depends on that constraint against our business. So notice we still have one negative indicator in the bottom. So this is going to be our last negative indicator. So that column is your pivot column. So let's go over here and we're going to take 20 divided by 1 and 16 divided by 1/2. I'm just going to write it as 0.5. And when I divide those ones out, I get 32 because this is twice, right? Half goes into each one, so it doubles it. And then this is just 20. So which one's smaller? The 20. So this is going to become my pivot variable. And so we start the same process over. That pivot needs to be a 1. So typically we then divide to get that a 1. Well, it's already a 1. Yay. And now we're going to do make the 1/2 and then -10 zeros. So we are going to think of it as -1/2 times row 2 plus row 1. And then we will replace that on row 1 to give us the 0 on row 1. Row 1. And then 10 times row 2 plus row 3, replace that on row 3. Okay, I'm going to squish it in over here. So 1/2 times row 2 plus row 1, replace on row 1, gives us that 0. And then the 1/2 times 0 plus 1 is a 1. -2 times 1/2 is -1. -1. Wait. Yeah, -1. I wrote 3 halves over here. Hold on. This one times -1/2. That's where I went wrong in my head. Okay, -1/2 times -2 is positive. So that's going to be +1 plus 1/2 is 3 halves. I was just like in my brain thought 1 was negative, 1's positive. So 3 halves here. And then the next one is -1/2 times 1 plus 0 is -1/2. 0 times anything plus itself is 0. And then 20 times -1/2 is -10. And then the 16, when we combine those, we just have 6 positive left. Middle row stays the same because that's our pivot row. Okay. And then the -10, now let's do 10 times the middle, add to the bottom. So 10 times all of these, add to the bottoms. So 10 times 1 is 10 plus the 10 is 0. 10 times 0 plus 0 is 0. 10 times -2 is -20 plus 40 is 20. 10 times 1 is 10 plus 0 is 10. 0 times 10 plus 1 is 1. 10 times 20 plus 1,280 is 1,480 because you added 200 to the answer you had before. Okay, ta-da. So I'm actually done here. I don't have any more negatives indicators in the bottom. Okay, so we're done. We have now made values out of x1 and x2. X1, X2, and the S1, S2, we've taken that slack and used it, and we've made a profit here. So we would write our answer out as X1 is equal to 20. I go across, right? 20. X2 is 6. S1 is nothing. S2 is nothing. And our profit is $1,480. Okay, so this process is just remembering it is going to take you some time, but it's kind of a cool idea, really, that I can take all sorts of different constraints on a business and form a matrix and solve it. And again, this is newer math. Like someone invented this more recent. So here's me kind of, not me, this is the book or the PowerPoint kind of walking through that same thing that we just did, and they got that same final answer here. Okay, I never write the side variables because I find them a little bit confusing. And they do talk about entering variables and exiting variables, right? As one enters, I think it's labeled, just a sec, up here, right? So this variable is entering and the S1 is exiting. Okay, S1's going to exit, this one's going to enter. the words exit should really be right here. For S1. Just in case it asks you in your homework, like what's exiting and entering. So basically, we're taking those hours and using them, and then we have meaning to our profit, and the slack goes away. Okay. Again, that's just me writing it out. They do show this geometrically. Now, you've already gone over geometric, so this should make sense to you. It is awesome. We can easily see the geometric in the feasible region. What did we say the solution was? What, 6 and 20? So that's this bottom one right here, right? And it's basically showing you kind of like what the graph looked like and everything. So this would end up being your most profitable situation. Can you do them all by graphing? Oh, not. That's why we have this method. Nope, we cannot do geometric representation of all of them, or we would. All right, let's do another problem. So what I'll probably, well, I think I'll be okay. Okay, so I was thinking about pausing and making a part two, but I think we'll just go ahead and finish. We'll do at least this problem. Okay, so for this one, it's a maximize. All the constraints are less than. That becomes important later. Where do we start? Well, we start with rewriting with our slack variables. So we're going to rewrite this with our slack variables. They call it your initial system. And we're going to rewrite our max at the bottom. So our first slack one is 5x1 plus x2. We're going to add in slack 1 and now make it equal to 9. Okay, so we took away less than and put in a slack variable with the equals. Now the bottom one becomes x1 plus x2 slack 2, oops, plus slack 2, and now that equals 5. We can ignore they have to be greater than 0. You'll have to put those in, but S1 is equal greater than 0, S2 is greater than 0, X1, X2, all of them are greater than 0. All right, then the last one, we're going to move that 2 and that x2 over. So we're going to move this over and this over. So that becomes a negative 2x1 plus or minus an x2 plus p equals nothing. So we moved those over with p, they became negative, and we have to line them up in the correct columns with x1s and x2s. So there's your initial system. Let's write our matrix out. Our matrix is going to go 5, 1, 1. I'm going to write these out on our first one, 2x2, s1, s2, and p. So this was 0, 0, 9. And then the next one went 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, 5. Last one went -2, -1, 0, 0, 1, 0. Okay, there's our initial system. So we still have two negative indicators. Which one's the larger, more to the left on your number line is going to be this one, right? So then I look at 5 divided by 1 and 9 divided by 5. Well, that one's 5. 9 divided by 5 is definitely smaller. That is going to give us 1.8. So 5 is going to be our pivot. That's our first pivot, right? That's our pivot row, pivot column. So with that being our first pivot, we want to make that pivot a 1. So we're going to take row 1 and divide it by 5. It does make fractions, we'll live. So this becomes 1, 1/5, 1/5. 0 divided by anything is 0, 0 divided by anything is 0, 9 divided by 5, we'll just write it as 9/5. Then we still have the 1, the 1, the 0, the 1, the 0, the 5. -2, I'm going to circle that again too. -1, 0, 0, 1, 0. Okay, so that's our pivot. What do we do after we make that pivot a 1? we're going to make everything in that pivot column a 0. So we want to take negative, we want this, we're going to multiply always by your pivot row and add to this one. So multiply that by -1, add to this, multiply it by 2, and add down here. So let's write that out in symbols. We'd have negative row 1 plus row 2, replace it on the one you want the 0, which is the row 2. Last one is +2 times row 1 plus row 3, replace on row 3. Okay, so your pivot row, write this down, is going to stay the same. 0, 0, 9/5. Okay, now the next one, we're going to take, basically make those negative and add to this one. So 1 minus 1 is 0, 1/5. -1/5, excuse me, -1/5 plus 1 is going to give me 2/5, or 4/5, excuse me, 0.8. Yeah, 4/5. Why did I went the wrong way in my brain? So that's 4/5. And then 0 times, or -1/5, plus 0 is -1/5. 0 plus 1 is 1, 0 plus 0 is 0, and then 9/5, and we want to times that. Oops, that's just negative. By -1, and then 9/5 plus 5, I get 3, so 16/5. I just left it improper. It's 3.2. You can write that, it's fine. Okay, last row. 2 times the first row, and that's going to make a 0. 2 times 1/5 is 2/5, so 2, duh. And then 2/5 plus -1, or -1 for that bottom. And I get -3/5. Don't like fractions, but you know, sometimes you just got to deal with them. So 2/5, so 2 times 1/5, right, is 2/5 plus 0 is 2/5. And then 0 times anything plus that 0. 0 times anything is 0 plus 1. And then 9/5 times, so 9/5 times 2 is 18/5 plus 0. So that's 3.6 or 18/5. Okay. If you don't know by now that there's fraction keys on calculators and you're terrible at fractions, don't let that stop you from doing these. Just use your fraction key. Okay, so because you can just do division, and then in the graphing calculator under math on the side here, the top one will convert your fraction over. So this one has still one more negative indicator. So you can see now x1 has a value and s1 does not. So entering x1, exiting s1. And so now we still need another pivot. I think I got to add another piece of paper real quick because you write big with an Apple pen. All right, so then from here, I need to get rid of this negative indicator, and I'm going to have to use my calculator over here because it's 16/5 divided by 4/5, and it's 9/5 divided by 1/5. So I'm going to do that in here. 9/5 divided by 1/5 is 0.36, or 9/25. I'm just going to write it as 0.36. Okay, and then 16 divided by 5 divided by 4 divided by 5. I think it's doing it in the right order. It's 0.16. Let me make sure real quick that I have this right. No, it did not do it right. I did it wrong on my calculator. I'm lying over here. I had to put a parenthesis around them for it to, this calculator is older. So this is 4. That makes more sense because I'd flip it and the 5s would cancel. 16 divided by 4. Same with that one. This one's 9. Flip it. That should have just done it by hand. Flip the 1/5. The 5s cancel. 9/1. Perfect. So the 4 row is this one. And that one we want to make a 1, please. What can I times 4/5 by to make it a 1? I can times it by 5/4, right? So 5, oops, wrote 4 instead of 5. So 5/4 times row 2. So we're going to do that real quick to make that pivot a 1. So this row is pretty. And now we're going to make 5/4. This is going to become a 1. 5/4 times a negative 1/5 will be a negative, what am I thinking? 1/4. The 5s cancel. Okay, and then 5/4 times 1 is 5/4, and then times 0 is a 0. 16/5 times 5/4 becomes 4, right? Because 16/5, and then divide that by, no, times that by. Yeah, because then the 5s cancel, and the 4 divided in there is 4. Thought I was wrong. Really thought I should have a fraction there. Whoosh, kaboosh. Then this all stays the same. Negative 3/5, 2/5, 0, 1, 18/5. All right. There, dot, 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 dot. Okay, that's our pivot. And it looks like we only have one negative indicator left, so this will be great. So we're almost done. We're going to take negative 1/5 and times that by row 2, add that to row 1, replace that on row 1. Then we're going to take a positive 3/5 times row 2 plus row 3 and replace that on row 3. I wrote those huge. I'm going to try to, well, maybe I won't try to squish it in there. I wrote those so big. I'm gonna slide them over a little. There we go. And then, okay, so negative 1/5 times 0 plus 1. Negative 1/5 times 0 plus 1 is still a 1. Negative 1/5 times 1 plus 1/5 is that. Negative 1/5 times negative 1/4 is a positive 1/20th. 1/20th plus 1/5. I need a common denominator. I don't want to. 1/20th plus 1/5 is 1/4. Thank you, calculator. And then times row 2, so a negative 1/5 times 5/4 is going to be negative 1/4. And then the 0 times 0 plus 0, and then I have to do the 4. So 4 times negative 1/5 is negative 0.8, and then I'm going to add that to 9/5, and I got 1. Ooh, that one kind of worked out pretty. I don't know if that's pretty, but it worked out. Middle road stayed the same. 5/4, 0, 4. Okay, last row is the 3/5 times the middle, and then add it down. So 0 times 3/5 plus 0 is 0, and then 3/5 times 1 plus 3/5 is 0, and then negative 1/4 times 3/5. Ew. I don't like that 3/5 is kind of hiding, but so 3/5 times 1, negative 1/4 plus 2/5. So I'm going to go 3 divided by 5. I'm going to times that by negative 1 divided by 4, and then I'm going to add it to 2 divided by 5, 2/5, and I get a 4th. Okay, and then negative 5/4 times 3/5 is going to give me 3/4 plus 0 is 3/4. 0 times anything is 0 plus 1. Perfect. 4 times 3/5 is 2.4. Add that to 18/5, and I get 6. Whew, that is ugly problem. Okay, just fractions make it ugly. All right, we're done. No more negative indicators. What is x1 going to equal? It's going to equal 1. We go across that row, right? x1, and we go across, and it's from the 1, and we get the 1. x2, we can see is 4. Okay, and then um, where is, hold on. And then our S1 is going to be 0. Our S2 is going to be 0. And our profit is going to be all of 6. I hope that's in millions. I hope our profit's in millions because I surely don't want that little of profit, but I don't know. Okay, so there is another one. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video now, and then I'll make separate videos for more problems, just so you could get the idea and then watch the other videos after you've tried a couple. Okay, all right.